What do you do when you built something from scratch, only to realize it's slowly falling apart without you noticing? Wesley Jameson stood at gate C14, a baseball cap pulled low over his brow, a neon yellow vest zipped halfway up, and a pair of heavy-duty gloves tucked into his belt loop. He looked like any other maintenance trainee starting his first shift at one of the busiest airport terminals in the state. No one glanced twice. 7 years ago, Wesley bought out a struggling janitorial operations company that served 9 key airport locations across 3 states. He poured everything into turning it around. Better equipment, better wages, better training, he built it up from the ground. But lately, reports hadn't been adding up. Missed cleanings, repeated complaints from airline staff about restrooms being filthy. A terminal manager reported that 2 cleaning crews walked off mid-shift last month, citing a toxic work environment. Wesley didn't like secondhand stories, so he shaved his beard, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and swapped out his usual suit for steel-toed boots. No one at this airport had ever met him in person. With nearly 600 employees across the 9 locations, it wasn't hard. He was here to see for himself. "Hey, new guy," a voice called out behind him, "you with me today?" Wesley turned. A slim man in his late 50s approached, mop in one hand, a lunch bag in the other. "Yeah," Wesley said, adjusting his cap. "Name's Wes." "Carlos," the man said, shaking his hand. "Let's get moving. We got 4 restrooms to hit before the flight from Chicago lands. Trust me, you do not want to be cleaning after that one." Carlos moved fast for someone his age, carrying himself like he'd done this 1,000 times and probably had. Wesley followed, noting how Carlos scrubbed without cutting corners and actually took time to greet passengers when they passed. The man was kind. He smiled. Even when a kid puked near the Starbucks and the mother just walked away, Carlos cleaned it up without a word. By noon, Wesley's back ached. He hadn't lifted a mop in 2 decades. They sat on a bench outside a closed terminal wing, and Carlos pulled out a beaten-up thermos and a foil-wrapped sandwich. "You didn't bring lunch?" Carlos asked, eyeing Wesley's empty hands. "I wasn't sure how long orientation would be," Wesley lied. Carlos didn't hesitate. He broke the sandwich in half and handed a piece to him. "Egg salad," he said, "just don't sniff it too hard. I made it 2 days ago." Wesley laughed, taking the sandwich. "Thanks, man." Carlos waved it off. "We look out for each other here, or at least we used to." Wesley glanced at him. "What do you mean?" Carlos chewed slowly, then wiped his mouth. "Used to be a good team. Now people quit every other week. Managers talk to us like we're trash. We're understaffed every single shift. You saw it today, we're 2 people down. They just don't replace folks anymore. And the ones they do hire, they leave after a week." Wesley nodded, staying quiet. Carlos leaned back. "I've been here 12 years. I'm not afraid of work, but something's changed and not in a good way." "Who's your manager?" Wesley asked. "Diane, been here about a year. She's got her moments, but mostly she just hides in her office. Never cleans with us, never checks in. If you have a problem, tough luck." A call crackled over the walkie clipped to Carlos' hip. "Restroom near gate D5 urgent. Overflow." Carlos groaned, stood, and grabbed his mop. "Back to the grind. Let's move, Wes." They cleaned through the afternoon without a break. Wesley watched as 2 other workers, young guys no older than 20, showed up an hour late, laughed off their tardiness, and wandered off without doing much. Carlos didn't say a word, just kept working. By 5, Wesley's shirt clung to his back with sweat. He was exhausted, but more than that, he was angry. Carlos held the door open as they exited the last restroom. "You did all right today, not bad for a rookie." Wesley smiled. "Thanks, you too." They walked past the break room. Through the small window, Wesley saw a woman in her 30s scrolling her phone at the manager's desk, feet propped up, a half-eaten donut beside her. She didn't even glance at them as they passed. Back in the locker area, Carlos clapped Wesley on the shoulder. "You show up again tomorrow. I'll bring you a full sandwich." Wesley chuckled. "I'll hold you to that." As Carlos disappeared down the hall, Wesley sat on the bench and pulled out his phone. He opened the employee reports for this location. Carlos wasn't even listed on the last 3 team evaluations. The 2 guys who slacked off, rated highly dependable. He closed the file. It was time to stay longer. Wesley made a decision right then he'd spend the next 3 days working shifts. Different times, different teams, quietly, watching, listening. Because if Carlos was right, and it sure looked like he was, then this terminal wasn't just understaffed. It was broken from the inside. Wesley arrived the next morning at 5:45, walking through the back employee entrance before the sun had even touched the terminal windows. The break room lights flickered weakly overhead, casting a dull yellow on the cracked floor tiles. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. A few custodians already sat along the wall, 2 women in matching gray polos quietly tying their shoes. A man in his 60s hunched over his thermos with a distant look in his eyes. Wesley kept his cap low and nodded to them as he passed. No one looked twice. A clipboard hung from a nail near the door. He scanned the list he'd been assigned to the overnight turnover team, scheduled to deep clean the jet bridge corridors and loading area floors. His partner was listed as Reggie Zone 3 lead. Reggie hadn't arrived yet. A few minutes later, a tall man in his early 40s came in through the side door, his uniform rumpled and his face drawn. He tossed a half-empty energy drink in the trash and grabbed a mop cart without saying a word. "You Reggie?" Wesley asked. The man looked up slowly, eyes narrowing. "Yeah, you the new guy from yesterday." Wesley nodded. "Wes." Reggie gave a short nod and wheeled the cart toward the service elevator. "Let's move, we're already behind." The elevator doors shut with a metallic groan, and they rode in silence to the lower tarmac level. As they stepped out, the air grew colder, the concrete floor slick from mist that clung to the loading docks. A few cargo workers passed by them, dragging crates toward the freight lifts. Reggie didn't explain the route or mention any safety protocols. He simply started mopping along a painted line, the wheels on his cart squeaking with each turn. "You been doing this long?" Wesley asked, trying to keep pace. "Since before the merger," Reggie muttered without looking up. "Used to be decent before they shuffled everything around." Wesley kept working. The space was massive rows of glass-walled corridors, each leading to the jet bridges, each needing to be stripped, scrubbed, and dried before the morning flights. They moved through them one by one, the industrial hum of the airport growing louder as the terminal above began to wake. An hour passed, then 2. Reggie didn't stop. He didn't talk unless necessary. And unlike Carlos, there was no effort to acknowledge the people around them, no nods to flight crew, no glances at passengers disembarking from early arrivals. He just worked, shoulders hunched like he was pushing through a storm. At one point, Wesley spotted a broken light fixture dangling from the ceiling over Corridor 19. Water had begun pooling underneath it. "Should we report that?" Wesley asked. "Looks like a hazard." Reggie stopped mopping for the first time and looked back. "Tried that 3 weeks ago. No one came." He turned and kept going. By the time they reached the last corridor, Wesley's arms burned from scrubbing. Reggie leaned on his mop handle and rolled his neck with a quiet pop. "They cut our team from 5 to 3 last month," he said. "Told us the metrics didn't justify the labor hours. Now we just do what we can and pray no one slips." Wesley glanced down the hallway. The floor gleamed under the overhead lights. It looked clean, but he knew now that didn't tell the whole story. As they packed up, Reggie's radio crackled. "Zone 3, report to Terminal B Stairwell 6. Biohazard, immediate." Reggie sighed and grabbed a new set of gloves. You coming? They reached the stairwell in minutes. A flight attendant stood nearby, her arms crossed, eyes wide. Someone threw up all over the landing, she said. It's disgusting. Reggie nodded. We'll take care of it. They worked in silence, Reggie handling the worst of it, Wesley backing him up with fresh supplies. The smell was overwhelming. No ventilation, no windows, just two men on their knees trying to make sure travelers didn't have to see what they had. When they finished, Reggie sat on the bottom step and pulled off his gloves. His hands were red and raw. You ever think about quitting? Wesley asked quietly. Reggie let out a breath. Every day, but got a daughter, and the insurance, it's the only reason I'm still here. Wesley said nothing. The stairwell buzzed with the sound of fluorescent lights overhead. At the end of the shift, they returned to the break room. Reggie didn't linger. He dropped his gloves in the bin, nodded once to Wesley, and left without another word. Wesley stayed behind, watching two new recruits argue with a supervisor near the supply closet. Their uniforms were too clean. One of them held a broom sideways like it was foreign, and the other kept checking his phone as the supervisor barked something about missed assignments. Neither seemed particularly concerned. He stepped outside for air. The loading lot buzzed with trucks and noise, but the sky was a soft gray, the sun still low over the horizon. He leaned against the concrete wall near the side bay, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Carlos had been the heart. Reggie was the weight. And now there were these kids fresh out of training, already checked out. He checked the schedule board before heading home. Tomorrow, he'd be assigned to the sanitation bay, the team responsible for cleaning waste from grounded aircraft. Not glamorous, but essential, and he needed to see it. The next morning, he met his new team at 5:30. The sanitation bay sat just off the tarmac, a squat building with vents that spewed out the heavy stench of chemicals. Inside, a woman in her early 50s handed him a clipboard. You're with Morris and Jenna, she said without looking up. They're already on the field. Wesley found them near Gate A3. Morris, a broad man with a shaved head and stained gloves, and Jenna, a sharp-eyed woman with a permanent scowl. Both were already in hazmat vests, dragging hoses to the side of a parked aircraft. You the new temp? Jenna asked. Wes, he said. Morris nodded. Grab a mask. We got 2 more before the next rotation. They moved quickly, attaching suction hoses to the waste tanks beneath the aircraft, while another worker sprayed down the service door with disinfectant. The smell was unbearable at first, but after an hour, Wesley stopped noticing. It was just part of the job. During a short pause between planes, Jenna lit a cigarette behind the stair truck and squinted at him. You from the main crew? Carlos trained me, Wesley replied. She nodded. He's solid, doesn't cut corners. Wish we had more like him over here. But they keep shifting people around, giving the worst assignments to whoever complains the least. Morris sat on a crate nearby, removing his mask. They don't care where they put us. 1 week we're here, next week we're scrubbing food courts. No consistency. Wesley crouched beside him. Who's making those decisions? Morris laughed. That'd be Diane. She says it's cross-training. We say it's chaos. You can't build a team if they keep gutting it. Jenna blew smoke toward the wind. And it ain't just about work. She's got favorites. Gives them all the day shifts, lets them call in without penalty. The rest of us, you sneeze and she docks your hours. Wesley nodded slowly. Anyone ever bring it up? Morris raised an eyebrow. Sure, once. Guy named Terrence spoke up in a team meeting. Next week, they cut his shift in half, told him they were reviewing labor needs. He left a month later. The radio buzzed again. Another aircraft, another tank to drain. As they walked back toward the tarmac, Jenna glanced at him. You ask a lot of questions for a new guy. Wesley smiled faintly, just trying to understand the place. She shrugged. Then here's what you need to understand: don't expect anyone to fix it for us. You either survive it or you don't. They returned to work. By the end of the shift, Wesley's shoulders ached from lifting hoses, and his hands stung from the harsh chemicals. But what weighed on him more was what he now knew: this wasn't an isolated issue. It wasn't just Carlos being overlooked or Reggie being overworked. It was systemic. A slow erosion of the values he'd built the company on: respect, integrity, accountability. And it was happening right under the leadership he'd trusted to carry those values forward in his absence. As he changed back into his street clothes and stepped into the daylight, he realized something else. He'd seen enough. Tomorrow, he wouldn't be showing up in a yellow vest. Tomorrow, they'd see who he really was. Wesley arrived in a charcoal sport coat and black slacks, a quiet presence beneath the fluorescent lights of the admin wing. The corporate ID badge clipped to his belt had his full name and title: Wesley Jameson, CEO, no more hiding. He moved past the break room, empty now, except for a stack of used uniforms in a broken bin, and turned into the north corridor where the operations office overlooked the terminal floor. A glass door marked Site Manager Diane Keller sat slightly ajar. Inside, Diane was typing with one hand while sipping an iced latte with the other. She didn't look up until he stepped across the threshold. "If you're looking for HR, that's 2 doors down," she said, barely pausing. "I'm not." She blinked, then straightened, clearly uncertain. "I'm Wesley Jameson," he said, voice calm but direct. "I'm the owner of this company." Her hand froze on the keyboard, the silence stretched. "I wasn't expecting no one mentioned." "I didn't announce it," he said, stepping inside. The office was neat but impersonal. No team photos, no posted schedules, just a printer, a whiteboard with half-erased notes, and a calendar stuck on last month. "Let's sit," he added. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the chair behind the desk. Wesley didn't sit. He remained standing, hands folded in front of him, steady. "I've worked 3 full shifts under your supervision," he said. "Side by side with your teams. I've mopped floors, cleared biohazards, and drained waste tanks from grounded aircraft. I've seen your staffing levels. I've seen your training gaps. But most of all, I've seen what kind of leadership is or isn't happening here." Diane's face was pale now, but she kept her voice measured. "I wasn't made aware of any executive evaluations. Normally, we're given notice so we can." "Prepare," Wesley cut in, "so you can rearrange schedules, bring in extra staff, and hide the day-to-day reality. That's exactly why I didn't give notice." She opened her mouth, but he kept going. "You've created a system where the hardest working people are invisible and the worst performers are protected. I read your evaluations. Carlos isn't even on them, yet the 2 workers who showed up late and did nothing all shift received top marks." Diane looked down at her desk, but said nothing. "I spoke to Jenna and Morris," Wesley continued. "They're rotated constantly without warning, no consistency, no structure, no communication. Reggie's been carrying double the workload since you cut his team in half. He's never once received feedback or recognition. You've been here a year. You don't know their names, do you?" She glanced up, eyes tight. "I know their names." "Then you should know they're the reason this terminal hasn't collapsed." Her voice sharpened slightly. "You have to understand the pressure we're under. Corporate keeps asking for cost reduction. We had to trim somewhere." Wesley's voice stayed even. Cost reductions don't require abandoning accountability. They don't require favoritism. They don't require punishing those who speak up. Diane looked away. He took a breath. "We're not going to debate this. I'm replacing you, effective immediately." She stiffened. "You're firing me." I'm holding you accountable. That's what leadership looks like. He didn't wait for a response. He stepped out of the office, leaving the door open behind him. The terminal windows were tinted dark, but the morning light had begun to pour in. Below, teams were already moving the quiet start of another grinding shift. Wesley walked down the corridor and took the elevator to ground level, emerging near the service lockers. He asked an admin assistant to gather the full staff on duty for a meeting in the East Maintenance Bay. It took 15 minutes. When everyone had assembled, he stood in front of them in the echoing space, concrete walls lined with carts and crates. "I'm Wesley Jameson," he began. "Some of you already know that. Some of you know me as Wes, the guy who couldn't lift a mop right." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I started this company with the belief that every job here mattered, that every role deserved respect. That belief still stands, but what I've seen at this terminal doesn't reflect it." A silence. "I saw people giving their all with no recognition. Teams stretched too thin to meet impossible demands. Managers who stopped listening. I saw people carrying this place on their backs quietly, without complaint, and being ignored." He scanned the room. Carlos stood near the back, arms folded, eyes steady. Reggie was near the side wall, jaw set, listening. Jenna leaned against a pillar, face unreadable. "I'm not here to offer empty words. I'm here to put things right." He turned to a woman standing off to the side, a regional coordinator he'd flown in that morning. "This is Teresa Morales. She's taking over as interim terminal manager. She's been with us 10 years and built one of the most consistent, highest-rated teams in the system. She knows what it means to lead from the floor, not just from behind a desk." Teresa nodded, her expression serious. "We'll be working together. I'll meet with each of you this week. I want to hear your experiences and your ideas. No filters, no edits." Wesley turned back to the group. "We're rolling out a new staffing model here. Teams will be stabilized, no more random rotations. We're investing in updated safety gear and adding 2 float positions per shift to cover sick time and emergencies without overloading the rest of you." A few heads lifted, murmurs began. "We're also doing a full audit on evaluations and shift assignments. If you've been overlooked, if you've been carrying more than your share, it ends now. If you've been skating by or undermining others, that ends too." He took a breath, then paused. "There's one more thing." He walked over to Carlos. "You're being promoted," he said. "Shift supervisor, effective immediately." Carlos blinked. "Me?" "You've earned it. You've been leading without the title. Now you'll have the resources and authority to do it right." Carlos nodded slowly. He didn't speak. He just reached out and shook Wesley's hand. Wesley turned to Reggie. "You're getting your team back. We're restoring your full unit and adding a 4th member for coverage." Reggie nodded once, his expression hard to read. "And Jenna," Wesley said, looking over. She raised an eyebrow. "You're being reassigned to training development. Starting next week, you'll help build the onboarding program for new hires across all terminals." There was a long pause. Then she gave a single nod. "Fine, but I'm doing it my way." "Good," Wesley said. "That's why I picked you." He stepped back, letting the words settle. "This place only works if we all do. I lost sight of that. That won't happen again." He didn't give a speech about vision or mission statements. He didn't wave a banner or promise perfection. He just stood there, in the same uniformed space where these people worked every day, and let the silence carry what hadn't been said before. They broke off slowly. Some walked out quietly, others lingered to speak with Teresa. A few offered nods or handshakes. Wesley stayed until the last person left the bay. Then he walked back through the terminal, this time not undercover, not hidden. He saw the same scuffed tiles, the same flickering lights, but they felt different now. Because now, someone was watching. And more important, someone was listening. The following week moved like wet concrete, slow, heavy, and without shortcuts. Wesley didn't disappear after the reveal. He showed up every morning, not to micromanage, but to dig into the pieces that had been neglected for far too long. He rotated through crew meetings, joined Teresa in her one-on-ones, and sat quietly in the corner during performance reviews, listening more than speaking. No one pretended things had magically improved. The staffing shortages were still real. The exhaustion hadn't vanished. But there was a shift, subtle, cautious, but there. On Thursday, Carlos stood at the back of the sanitation bay with his new clipboard. His shift as supervisor had begun 3 days earlier, and the weight of it showed in the way he double-checked inventory sheets and jotted notes on crew feedback without needing to be asked. Wesley approached him near the back wall, where a set of industrial shelves leaned slightly from years of uneven weight distribution. "You're early," Carlos said, eyes still on his sheet. "Trying to make a habit of it," Wesley replied. Carlos didn't smile, but his stance relaxed slightly. "You ever think about just starting a coffee chain instead of a cleaning company?" "Too many decisions about foam," Wesley said. "How's the team adjusting?" Carlos finally looked up. They're not used to being heard. They're still waiting for it to go back to how it was. I don't blame them. "They talk to you." "They're starting to. Jenna came by yesterday. Gave me a list of broken equipment she said she'd reported 3 times before. No one followed up." "Where is it?" "Already logged it with maintenance." Wesley nodded. "Good." Carlos hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You know this doesn't fix everything, right? We're still 2 people short. I've got crews covering double zones every other shift." "I know," Wesley said. "We're hiring, slowly, carefully. I'd rather wait for people who want to be here." Carlos studied him for a moment. "Then you'll need to keep showing up." "I plan to." Carlos gave a short nod and turned back to his clipboard. Wesley moved through the building, past the staff lockers, where old schedules had been replaced with clean, color-coded rosters. Each one now listed backup coverage and direct contacts, simple changes, but ones that told people someone had finally noticed the chaos. In the admin office, Teresa was seated across from Reggie. Neither raised their voice. Both seemed intent on the spreadsheet between them. Wesley waited until they finished before stepping in. Reggie stood automatically, a reflex born from months of being summoned only when something had gone wrong. "You're not in trouble," Wesley said, easing the tension with a gesture. "I came to ask a favor." Reggie raised an eyebrow. "That's new." "I want you to train the next hire for Zone 3, not just shadow them. Train them your methods, your pace, your standards." Reggie didn't answer right away. Teresa leaned forward. "We've got 2 applicants shortlisted. One's done medical sanitation, the other's fresh out of high school. Either way, we want them to learn from someone who's been through it." Reggie crossed his arms. "You sure that's a good idea? I'm not exactly a motivational speaker." "I'm sure," Wesley said. "You're steady, you don't quit. That's what we want passed on." After a beat, Reggie nodded quietly. Wesley left them to it and headed to the main terminal corridor. The foot traffic was picking up. The morning flights had landed, and the gates buzzed with the usual tangle of families, business travelers, and airport staff weaving through each other like clockwork. He stopped near the food court, where a row of cleaning carts stood neatly parked beside the janitorial closet. The area had been spotless for 3 days, running a record, according to Teresa. He spotted Jenna near the kiosk station, clipboard in hand, walking a new hire through the opening checklist. Her tone was sharp but focused. She wasn't babysitting, she was teaching. Wesley waited until the trainee moved on before walking over. Didn't figure you for someone who'd stick with clipboard work, he said. Jenna gave him a glance. This isn't clipboard work, this is rebuilding. He tilted his head. You like it? I like not having to explain why a safety mask matters to someone who's going to ignore it anyway. That's a yes, then. She folded her arms. I still think we need to replace 3 of the mop buckets. The wheels lock up and drag grime across the floor. Noted. I'll make sure procurement sees it today. She nodded, already halfway back into her route. Wesley didn't stop her. Back in the break room, a few of the younger hires sat at the table eating lunch. They still carried that uncertain energy, but they weren't whispering about quitting. One of them pointed to the whiteboard, now filled with shift notes and reminders in real handwriting, not printed memos, and said something that made the others laugh. Wesley stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall. The changes were small, measured. He hadn't updated the entire system overnight. The hiring pipeline was still thin. The equipment upgrades were slow, caught in budget cycles and vendor delays. Not every terminal had a Carlos or a Jenna to hold things together, but this one did. And that mattered. Wesley returned to his hotel room that night and sat at the desk with a yellow legal pad. He wrote out a list: no laptops, no emails, just pen and paper. At the top, he wrote what it didn't know. He filled half the page before he stopped, not with excuses, with facts. Then he made a second list, what it will do next. He wrote slowly, deliberately. He would rotate visits through every terminal unannounced, unfiltered. He would implement a new feedback pipeline that bypassed middle management, giving employees direct access to an independent auditor. He would require every site manager to work 1 full shift a month on the floor. And he would never again assume that silence meant success. The next morning, Wesley arrived back at the airport before first shift began. Carlos was already there, checking supplies. Jenna was reviewing her training notes. Reggie stood near the elevator, speaking to a new hire who looked like he hadn't figured out what to do with his gloves yet. Wesley didn't interrupt them. He just stayed off to the side, watching the gears of something real begin to turn again. No speeches, no applause. Just work done right. And this time, he was paying attention.